Hello everybody, my internet name is Nitro Indigo and recently I've been watching a lot of animated movies. Today I'll quickly be reviewing a few films that I have something to say about. In the order I watched them: Cars. Shockingly creative title aside, this movie is nowhere near as bad as everyone says it is. I can understand why a lot of people find it boring, and in my opinion most of the supporting characters are very one note, but it has a nice moral and a very relaxed tone. Pixar seems to have forgotten that. The beginning is amazing. We get some dramatic character establishing narration, followed by a lot of shots that immediately show us what the world is like, no exposition required, while awesome music plays. There's a new guy in town, he's got high-paid friends, thinks he's gonna change history. I really like Lightning McQueen as a character. He goes from an egotistical jerk to someone who learns to appreciate the little things in life, but he never fully loses his original personality and still remains snarky. A lot of people complain that he's unlikable for most of the movie, but that's kind of the point. Even though I completely forgot it until this year, the song Life is a Highway makes me want to cry from nostalgia. It reminds me of when I'm watching scenery go by on long car journeys. It makes me think about how life isn't always straightforward, and it's all about the detours along the way. Just like the plot of this movie! Just like how Finding Nemo is really about parenthood, Cars is really about dine towns in America. That's the thing about Cars, it has a heart, but a lot of people choose to ignore it. It seems like people only hate this movie because everyone else does. I like to call that effect bandwagon hating. Next! Robots. Equally creative title aside, this movie looks fantastic. Everything is so shiny and I love all the imagination that went into the world of robots, though it sometimes spends too much time on showing us the city instead of getting on with the story. Said story is kind of I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it felt a bit dull. There wasn't really any character development, and the plot twist, bearing in mind that this was the first time I'd seen robots in years, left me thinking, oh, that was a thing. That being said, I did like Rodney's inventiveness and desire to achieve despite his background, but the next movie on this list did the same thing a lot better 2 years later. Next! Meet the Robinsons. I'm not a very emotional person, but I almost cried twice the last time I watched this. It's a very sweet movie. While full of quirky humour, it's really about an orphan boy who finally finds a loving family. This is easily my favourite Disney animated canon movie. I also really like the plot twists in Meet the Robinsons, and I still remembered them even after I forgot most of the movie until Mr. Enter reviewed it. Disney need to do their villain twists like this movie again, rather than the formula they've been using since Wreck-It Ralph. I now predict that if Disney ever makes a bird version of Zootropalopia Mania Town Ding Dong, they'll do the bootleg movies gag again, and one of the bootleg movies will be a version of Meet the Robinsons where the characters are actually robins. Next! Cars 2. This movie was a mixed bag. While it has a lot of interesting ideas and is surprisingly dark for a U-rated CGI movie, everything moves by way too quickly with no sense of how much time has passed, leaving no time for any emotions to sink in. 1 minute Lightning is upset because he thinks his best friend abandoned him. Next minute Finn is saying how an overdramatic escape that resulted in his colleague being shot was a great way to start the morning. Also, although it was foreshadowed, a certain plot twist felt like a certain character jumped to a conclusion in the span of a few seconds. Cars 2 also feels like the opposite of most Pixar movies. Most Pixar movies have simple stories with an obvious outcome, and the interesting part is seeing how the characters will develop. For example, we know from the start that in Toy Story, Woody and Buzz are going to make it back home, and there isn't a big reveal or plot twist. The interesting part of the movie is seeing how the two protagonists will learn to get along and how they'll make it back home. It becomes a game of how will they get out of this situation next. Cars 2, however, is more story-driven. The plot is about stopping the antagonist group's needlessly convoluted plan and figuring out who's behind it all, leaving little time for character development. The ending isn't immediately obvious, and the movie is a game of what will this situation lead to. In addition, while most Pixar movies happen due to a character flaw of the protagonist, for example, Woody being jealous of Buzz, the protagonist only ends up involved in the plot of this movie by accident, as Spy apparently thought that giving vital information to a random guy in the toilets was a good idea. This isn't inherently a good or bad thing, it just depends on the execution, and unfortunately, Cars 2 wasn't executed all that well. That being said, I'd like to see Pixar do an antagonist-driven story again, but as a new IP, please. For all of its faults, though, I can't hate this movie. Look at the animation, it's so photorealistic and shiny, and you can tell that Pixar researched all the places they go to. They did a good job of making a car-friendly version of our world. At the heart of the story is the loyalty between two best friends, even when they're miles apart, and it actually feels genuine, if extremely cheesy. However, Cars 2 is not a good sequel, at all. It's the exact opposite of the original Cars in tone and pacing and genre and everything, really. I get what they were trying to go for here, I really do. Pixar were trying to show us what the whole world of Cars is like, but if you want to make a sequel that expands instead of continues, you shouldn't number it. That being said, thanks to Finding Dory, I have faith in Cars 3. Incidentally, one thing I like about Finding Dory is that while it's still character driven, it also has a mystery element and a not immediately obvious conclusion. Pixar should do that more often.